much, Jake. When your name showed up on the list for speakers this year, immediately zeroed in on that. I'm like, oh, that's a good story. We should invite Jake to tell that story. So we're going to sprinkle in a lot of stuff, right? Like we know what we could talk about and should talk about, but we're going to sprinkle in a lot of fun things. So a lot's changed per that introduction. Thank you, Bill Ray, for being a great sponsor over the last 3 years in business and personal life and all of that. So we at Silicon Slopes were able to see the whole thing because we were part of COVID task forces, and we sent out surveys about what people thought about their company culture and whether they wanted to work remote, in office, all of that. So we all know all of that, but there's a lot of nuances to it, right? And for people like you and Groundswell, those aren't surveys, those aren't people's opinions, those are opportunities to change things and to improve upon things, right? So with that, just real briefly, give a quick background, and then we'll hit on a lot of those points that led you to becoming the founder and CEO of Groundswell.
Yeah, so if you hear my background as a Marine sniper and a disaster responder, you're like, oh, it makes sense. That guy's going to start a fintech company. It's a joke. Didn't land well. But, briefly speaking, after college, I joined the Marine Corps. I served overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan as a scout sniper, and, learned a lot about not just leadership and managing risk, managing ambiguity, all of those things that are really, really important for being an entrepreneur. I also just learned a lot about people. It also kind of reframed for me the world. And so when I got out of the Marine Corps, frankly, I didn't actually know what I was going to do with my life. I thought I was going to go get an MBA like everybody else that doesn't know what they're going to do with their life. And the universe kind of had other plans. I ended up starting a disaster response organization called Team Rubicon in the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake back in 2010. So I took a team of veterans and doctors down to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, about 3 or 4 days after that earthquake. If you remember that earthquake, it was the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the last century. 100,000 people died instantly. Another 150,000 people died in the next 7 to 14 days. So really challenging, but what we learned while we were down there was that, hey, military veterans are really good at this disaster relief stuff. So we started this nonprofit kind of by accident, stumbling upon that. And for 11 and a half years, I never looked back. We ended up scaling that nonprofit to 150,000 volunteers. And we ended up raising about $300 million in philanthropy. That's a lot of money. And when I started raising all that money in philanthropy, I learned, I think, 2 really kind of important lessons about how philanthropy works in the US. First, we raised a lot of money from people, billionaire family offices and tens of thousands of average normal people like you and me all across the country. And it drove me insane that widow in Kansas who was giving us $25 out of her Social Security income was giving a more meaningful portion of her wealth than the billionaire who was, cutting a $100,000 check. And that's not to discredit that billionaire's philanthropy, but what bothered me was that widow in Kansas didn't have access to the same philanthropy tools that billionaire had. Tax-advantaged foundations and personal giving accounts, philanthropic advisors, things like that. And then the second important lesson I learned was that companies are really bad at giving away money. They think they're really good at it because they typically think they're the smartest person in the room. But the reality is, most of them aren't that good at it. And part of the problem is they want something in return for their philanthropy. They don't admit it, but they want positive press. They want to engage and inspire their employees, but they fail to do that effectively. And so we came up with this idea for Groundswell to kind of solve both of those issues. What we do basically is we've created a platform that makes philanthropy and employee benefit. We do that by providing tax-advantaged personal giving accounts to employees, kind of like an HSA for charity. And then companies can seamlessly fund or match funds into those accounts for those employees to give away. So it's an empowerment of those employees, and it's an acknowledgement of their diverse perspectives on what matters most. And so as we talk about community today, I think those are some of the themes we're going to be talking about. Like, how do you empower people? How do you respect the diverse perspectives of your people? How do you trust them to execute those things on your behalf?
Yeah, love it. And the background is very unique. And we're going to hit on a lot of things that there's synergies and then a lot where there's not, right? Because you can be a Marine Corps sniper, you can work with Team Rubicon, and then you can work with a couple of engineers trying to get something across the finish line, and it's probably the same level of misery, depending on the day and time and hour.
Yeah, I'm a glutton for punishment,
There
for
you
sure.
go. Okay, so pandemic hits, crisis hits, that's where Team Rubicon jumps in, right? You get a text at 3 a.m., phone call, you know, it's probably go time. And in the early days, it was just duct tape and baling wire, but by the time you know, 2020, you were pretty refined and knew how to do things. But you kind of had that itch to take your next challenge, right? Which was Groundswell. So did the pandemic force you to make that decision? Because it seems like to me like a pretty good time for you to stay at Team Rubicon and make sure. But it also might have been a good time for Groundswell. So how did you juggle those two?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, you know, by 2020, I'd been running Groundswell for running Team Rubicon for a decade. And as you might imagine, it's really exhausting responding to the world's catastrophes 24 hours a day. You know, we'd responded to 1,000 disasters by the time 2020. That's not hyperbole, 1,000 catastrophes around the globe in those 10 years, ranging from every hurricane, tornado, wildfire, flood you've heard of, civil wars, pandemics, and then eventually the global pandemic, COVID. And so I had already planned on moving on from Team Rubicon in 2020 as we were, you know, turning the calendar on 2019. And then by the middle of February, you know, I looked around at my team, and we all had this moment when that pandemic first, like, the reality of what was happening set in. You know, I looked at our team, incredible team, and I looked at my CFO, and I said, I want you to give me 3 scenarios: bad, ugly, and apocalyptic, for what happens with the fundraising over the course of the next couple of months. Because we just imagined that it was going to evaporate. And then I looked at my head of operations and I said, we need to get as many of our 100,000 volunteers into this fight as quickly as possible. We didn't have a playbook for what that looked like. We have like amazing standard operating procedures for responding to every disaster imaginable, but we didn't have a playbook for a global pandemic. Nobody did. If they told you they did, they're lying. But I said, we don't have the playbook, we have the players. We got to go figure it out. This is our obligation to the community. And so we moved more aggressively than just about any organization in the US into that fight. And we did everything from, we took over the management of the healthcare system of Navajo Nation for over 100 days, treating 10,000 patients there, to working with, you know, Feeding America and filling tens of thousands of volunteers into food banks all across the country, things that we'd never done before. But again, you know, in these moments of crisis, you have to meet that moment. It certainly delayed my leaving or stepping down from day to day at Team Rubicon. Eventually, I made that move at the end of June of 2021 to come over and start building Groundswell full time.
Yeah. And so with Team Rubicon, Marine Corps, Wisconsin football, I'm going to just hit on the parts of your life that are most well known. There's a purpose and a mission behind all of those, right? In the business world and corporate America, oftentimes those are kind of poo-pooed and not respected, right? It's on the wall, or it's not even followed or adhered to. So it obviously is something that you're passionate about. You've seen it work. You've seen it be applied in real life, and you had the chance from scratch to come up with a purpose-driven organization within Groundswell, right? Starting with a small team, growing, scaling, fundraising, all of that. How did you do that?
Yeah, you know, my passion is building teams, scaling teams, leading teams, and I was wondering, you know, as I made this transition from Team Rubicon to a software company, was I going to be able to build that same type of culture that we had at Team Rubicon at Groundswell? When I think about culture, I think about culture as that thing that guides decisions and behaviors in the absence of orders, right? So how do your people implicitly know what to do, how to act, how to behave when somebody isn't telling them what to do, how to act, how to behave? That has become extraordinarily important in a hybrid or virtual world. So as I was thinking about this, I remembered, I guess zooming out, one of my philosophies, I guess if you will, is that organizations, teams, companies are really nothing but stories, right? They're stories. A company is nothing but a story. Your vision is that final chapter. What is it that you want to see as the resolution that you achieve with your company, with your team, with your organization? You have your employees, their characters. Just like any story, you have protagonists, you have antagonists, you have a plot, you have unexpected twists, right? All of those elements are there. And when you think about how do you build community, how do you get high-performing people to come together and align on that vision or on that mission consistently, to go above and beyond in their effort, I think it's about storytelling. I think it's the most underutilized tool in any leader's toolkit. What I mean by that is, since we've created like the campfire and the spoken word, human beings have sat around campfires and told stories. We tell stories to entertain ourselves, we tell stories to explain things we can't explain, we tell stories to mark our history and pass that on from one generation to the next. And when you go to bed at night, every single one of you, when you go to bed at night, you think of your life as a story. You imagine what comes next. And no human being on the planet, at least I haven't met one, imagine themselves as nothing but the hero of their story. You all, that's what you want to be. You want to be the hero in the story of your life. You don't want to be some unnamed character on some random page in somebody else's story. And so as leaders, you have this unique opportunity with as much time as you spend, as much influence as you have, as much impact as you can create in your employees' lives to help them write that story. And if you treat your people like an unnamed character on page 56, they come to work and they put unnamed character effort in. If you treat people like a hero in that narrative arc of your company, they show up every single day ready to put in hero's work. And not only is that good for your bottom line, but it's incredible for their life. Think about how much time you spend at work. Again, the impact you have on that person's well-being, empowering those people to feel like they're a hero in that shared mission of your organization is such a powerful opportunity. And all too often, I think leaders, they shirk that responsibility and they don't help create that narrative arc for people.
I love it. And as the CEO, you've got to, great answer.
Thanks.
Not run out of money. Raise more money.
Storytelling doesn't help with money.
Yes. Probably do HR, probably do communications. This is part of the job of being a CEO. I think you want to be here, and I'm having a good time with you, but I will never know if you actually wanted to be here. Okay. Anyways, it's all part of being the CEO. And a lot of CEOs and a lot of leaders can't even formulate exactly what you just described as like hero, not be an unnamed source on page 56. And of course, there's easy things to track in business like a P&L or somebody closed 3 deals in March. How do you know, without a dashboard, that what you just described is working, that your employees feel like heroes and are working like heroes?
So that's a question. That was not a prepped question. That's a great question because I've got a great answer for that one. Because early at Team Rubicon, we were trying to figure out, like, we knew how important culture was. In the Marine Corps, culture is everything. Going back to storytelling, at the School of Infantry, when they're teaching us infantry tactics, right? They'll go to a whiteboard or a chalkboard and they'll do the X's and O's just like a football coach. You know, they'll talk about, okay, here's how you respond to a close ambush. You know, and they'll draw it up just like Bill Belichick, right? They'll spend like 5 minutes on the X's and O's, and they'll put the whiteboard away, and they'll just sit there and they'll tell us stories about past Marine Corps battles, about past Marines like Sergeant John Basilone, who died on the Battle of Guadalcanal in a close ambush, because they know in that moment of consequence, we're not going to remember the X's and O's. You'll remember the story. You'll remember the story, and you'll do everything you can to meet that story, to become that story. And that's really powerful. It's a driver for the human experience. So to get back to your question, as we were trying to build Team Rubicon in the early days, and we were trying to say, okay, is this working? We saw our first Team Rubicon tattoo. I was like, that's weird. And then we saw our second Team Rubicon tattoo. And it was like on a guy that had, you know, these are mostly military veterans, right? So it was like on a guy that had like 30 tattoos. So I'm like, that's like a 3% tattoo increase. I'm not sure that one really, that really counts, right? He clearly hasn't thought very hard about most of his tattoo decisions. But then we saw our 10th, our 12th, our 50th, our 100th team. We have a coffee table book of Team Rubicon tattoos. Some of them are awful. Oh, some of them are awful. Some of them are really good. I don't have one. I've got Marine Corps tattoos. But what's interesting is, going back to Marine Corps tattoos, you go and you get that tattoo because the Marine Corps, or in this case, Team Rubicon, has become a part of your life, a part, in fact, of your identity. It's the type of thing that if it disappeared overnight, it would leave an irreplaceable, non-economic void in your life. So a lot of people might hear that and they think like, yeah, but I want to separate work from home. Work is just work. Work doesn't have to be just work. You can love going to work. You can love the mission that you're pursuing, the people that you're pursuing with. You can find yourself at a company where you think to yourself, man, I can't imagine working anywhere else. Now, one of the interesting things, as we've been building Groundswell up and building a team, I think we're probably the only software company that's emerged post-COVID, and from the beginning is saying we're going to build an in-person company. We've got an office in Los Angeles. We've got 30 employees. For a lot of the employees, like the engineers, we were telling them early, we want you in the office 3 to 4 days a week. Actually, I think it was 2 to 3 days a week. And we got the door slammed on us 90% of the time. Oh, that's insane. I can go work for more money over here and it's completely remote. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. Good luck. And so eventually we found these people who begrudgingly accepted a 2-day-a-week expectation. Nothing more, nothing less. That was, for the engineers, that was the expectation. Those dudes are in there 4 or 5 days a week. Not because we're asking them to, because they love being there. Why do they love being there? I pulled some of them aside. I'm like, why are you coming in so often? You were so against this. They said, I didn't realize that I could ever actually enjoy coming into an office. Everywhere I've ever worked was a terrible, toxic workplace culture. This doesn't drain my energy, this gives me energy. Like, you have a responsibility as a CEO to provide that type of experience for your people.
Absolutely. And so that's the answer, right? People come in and say, I'm invigorated and energized and not drained, right?
Yeah.
And as you face the challenge of growing a company, this is new to you, right? Like, you've grown Team Rubicon, but with this one, you've got to ship products that are digital and didn't exist 3 months ago. They were on a whiteboard, and you've got investors and you've got a cap table. How often do you find yourself using previous experiences from previous parts of your life, or are you using this as an opportunity to blank slate it and go for like another adventure and learn from that and just keep compounding?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a learning experience. Like, I don't know anything about software. Truth be told, I'm learning some things. I'm like a walking meme for my engineering team. So I've done a lot of talks. I do a lot of speaking on topics of like leadership and organizational culture. And every once in a while, I'd have somebody previous to Groundswell who would raise their hand. They'd say, like, I get how this works on the battlefield or in the disaster zone, but this isn't applicable to me. I work at a bank or I work at a software company. And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, most of this stuff is universal. And so I have taken largely the same approach for how we build the teams, how we motivate them, how do we bring them together to do their best work. And we've had some misses. There've been some fits and starts, but I think generally speaking, my philosophy has always been hire the absolute best people that I can, the people that are going to challenge me every single day, and then get the hell out of their way. I'll also say, in addition to being like the only software CEO that raised money and starting an in-person company, my second hire was a head of people. You won't find many venture-backed software companies that their number 2 hire is a head of people. But your strategy is nothing without people. Why would you not invest in that early? And it's been a huge differentiator. I went and actually got my old head of people at Team Rubicon, actually. So,
I would agree 100%. And let's use the Marine Corps as one more example. If a staff sergeant gets an assignment, you can pick your team on this one, right? Team trumps everything else. Weapon systems, maybe not intel, but it's close. But that's a unique opportunity to pick your team. You started with chief people officer. And I assume it's made the rest of your life easier, because this is all new to you, right? Like, you need smarter and better people than you, your words, not mine, to help on this next mission.
Yeah, listen, it's easy to find people that are smarter than me. It's sometimes hard to get them all in a room and aligned behind that common vision. Like, how do you get people to, subject their ego to, this thing that's bigger than themselves? I mean, first you have to give them that thing. It has to be something worth pursuing. And then every single day you have to reemphasize to them why it's important. We started off, I think your first question was about vision and mission. I think, crafting a vision statement for your company or vision setting, that's like leadership 101. People get it. The elements of a good vision are all pretty simple. It has to be simple itself. It can't use ambiguous language. It's got to be bold, right? Without that boldness, it's not inspiring or motivating. It's got to be relatable, right? People have to hear or read that vision, understand how their effort leads to it. Simple, bold, relatable, like key ingredients. That's really easy to do. Super easy. 1 hour in a conference room with a whiteboard and your executive team, you emerge, you got your vision. That's easy. The hard part, every single moment from there on, that entire leadership team, most importantly that executive, they have to align every single decision, every action, every resource allocation to that vision. And if they don't align, if you say you want to be the best in the world but you accept mediocrity, your vision does nothing to drive your team. If you say that you want to do things the right way, but you're constantly leading without integrity, that vision has immediately lost any ability that it has to motivate and inspire, because they see that gap between what you say you want to do and what you're willing to do. That's the hard part of leadership. That's the hard part of using that vision to inspire a team. So that's what we focus on as a leadership team at Groundswell.
Love it. All right, in about 10-15 minutes, we're going to open up for questions from the audience. The rule was you have to be down here. So you either need to be seated or standing down here, and we'll have a mic. So don't be afraid. We can't actually see you, but we can feel it like a good positive energy from you. So have your questions ready for Jake. You mentioned at the beginning you're kind of pissed about a widow in Kansas giving $25, and then billionaire Bob giving $100,000. I would agree with that, right? In the time that it took that person to write the check, the interest on his third bank account would have been $100,000, right? So how much of Groundswell was baked in this theory of like, I want charitable giving to be easier, more equitable, and better for people, and how much have you built on in the past 2 years?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we set out to do was build the world's most modern donor-advised fund, which we've done. A mobile app that is the most modern, affordable giving vehicle that is accessible to anyone, and you don't have to be ultra-rich to afford it. And we were really proud of that. But you know what? Like, you could build that product all day long. It only matters if you get it actually in the hands of people. And so that's why we decided to really go after this from a B2B context, because again, going back to what I said, companies are not very good at giving their money away. And we see this opportunity like right now. So Hurricane Ian, this is a devastating hurricane that hit Florida. It may be the worst hurricane that has ever hit that state. And I've seen some of the bad ones over the last 10 years that have hit that state. It's devastating. There are a lot of CEOs in rooms right now that are sitting around a table and saying, what are we going to do? We got to do something. Oh, let's give $500,000. Okay, where should we give it? I don't know. Let's give it to the Red Cross. Okay. Listen, this isn't nothing against the Red Cross. Team Rubicon gets a lot of those $500,000 checks too. Okay? But here's the thing. Every single person in your company is going to look at that disaster through a different lens, from a different perspective. If you're a single mother, you might be thinking about that single working mother that is fleeing that storm with her kids. Here's a statistic for you. 40% of Americans don't have access to $400 in the case of an emergency. When you look at storms like Hurricane Ian, you're like, why didn't more people evacuate? You can't evacuate if you don't have $400. That's one tank of gas in this economy and one hotel's room's stay. One night in a hotel room. That's your entire net worth. So yeah, you probably sheltered in place. So now that you've lost your home, if you're that single mother that's working for the company giving money, maybe that's the lens you're thinking through, and you would have given that money to a local battered women's shelter on the ground. If you're an animal lover, you might be thinking about all those dogs that got left behind, or all the cats that got left behind in the storm that need to be sheltered. If you are a first-generation immigrant, you might be thinking about that organization who's been working for 50 years in that traditionally Hispanic community on the ground, who's going to need a ton of resources because FEMA historically has done a really poor job of working in non-English speaking counties post-disaster. So the opportunity to actually empower your people to tackle those issues is immense. Think about what happened in the aftermath of George Floyd. Horrific event, moment of reckoning across the country. And a lot of CEOs are like, oh, we got to give money. Who should we give it to? I don't know, Black Lives Matter. Okay, we did our job. But again, that's a complex issue. And 50 different people in your company are going to have 50 different perspectives on how to solve that issue of systemic racism or poor policing tactics. For some people, it's a early childhood education issue. For some people, it's recidivism. For others, it's better police training, whatever it might be. So how do you actually acknowledge those incredible perspectives of your people? It's the same reason why it's well documented, like diverse teams make better decisions, right? So why don't we extend that one step further in how we think about serving the problems in our community? Because I tell you what, those CEOs, they all kind of look like me. They're a little bit older than me. I call them pale, male, and stale. That's what we call them in the nonprofit community, right? They all look, they all look at the issues the same way, from one single perspective, one single lens. There's a better way.
Yeah. Great answer. Round of applause for that. Well thought out. So, as we're planning Summit, we get a lot of requests for free tickets, free access. And it's opposite of what you just described, but that is 100% true, right? There's 50 different opinions in that, and we have a little bit of control, right? Like, this is a group that's important to me. Okay, this is a group that's important to me. Okay, here's 10 tickets, here's 10 tickets, right? You can only do so much. But it's so interesting to view that when you're the one doling out the tickets, right? Like, never would have thought that was important to you, friend. So it's very enlightening, but it's also a lot to manage, right? So as you guys are building out these products, there's obviously a methodology to all of this, but what are some of the things that are surprising to you as far as like the diverse topics, the diverse interests of people, and like the diverse passion, and how do you build a product that accommodates that from like the B2B side that trickles down to the employee side, where like, oh, this is actually good, it works, it's not some gimmick?
Well, that's an interesting question. I might take it in a different direction. So one of the things we've been encountering as we're selling to companies is those companies, the decision maker that we're talking to, they say, we love this platform. We just want to make sure we restrict the charities that are available on the platform to these 10 charities. I'm like, have you been paying attention to what I've been saying? They're like, well, but these are the 10 that matter to us. They're the 10 that matter to you. Be careful with your pronouns. You used us. These are the 10 that matter to you and your perspective on the world. And they say, well, what if they give to something that I disagree with? It's the most important thing to them. Are you going to acknowledge it? Are you going to respect it? Are you going to be inclusive of it? Now, like, if you're a nonprofit on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate groups list, like, we kick you off the platform. But like, beyond that, this is about how we, as a community, both sides of the aisle, create a culture in our companies that is thinking about other people than ourselves. It's about building a culture of giving and a culture of gratitude within these organizations. And my philosophy, and I've been in hundreds of American communities over the last decade at their worst. And nothing exacerbates social issues faster than a disaster. Income inequality, domestic violence, disruptions to early childhood education. Nothing exacerbates those challenges more than a disaster. I've seen it all. And my belief is that if we just elevate the level to which, as a community, as individuals, we're thinking about people other than ourselves, collectively we're going to be moving in the right direction. And I think that's also the type of culture that we want to be in when we come to work. Culture that has that foundation of giving and gratitude is a special place. So how do you foster that?
Absolutely. All right. I believe we have 10 minutes and 30 seconds left. This will be interesting to see who raises their hand, but this is a chance to ask like a pretty well-rounded, pretty smart dude that's very thoughtful, some questions about life, about building their companies, about company culture, about missions. Raise your hand or come down. You're the next contestant. Here we go.
Yeah, and we only have one microphone, so if you can come down to the floor to ask a question, that'd be great.
Hi, how's it going? So I love the idea of philanthropic giving. I think that's excellent, but I'm also really aware, I've done a lot of research, that $1 to one organization can maybe do significant more good than $1 to another organization. So I love the idea of giving more power to people to decide what things they're important to, but do you advocate for the organizations that are more effective? Do you educate the community on which organizations are in the greatest need? I just love to hear about just beyond just like letting anyone choose what they want to give to, which ones need the most money.
Yes, that's a great question, and I'll say two things. One, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what effective philanthropy looks like. That's a topic for another conversation, but I think it leads to the real answer to your question, which is, when we talk about like building or creating or unlocking the modern philanthropist, when a billionaire decides he wants to go support an issue, he or she goes and finds like the smartest people in the country to educate them now on that issue. And then they go hire Bridgespan Associates, a consulting firm, to go cull through all the nonprofits working on it and come back with a slate of 5 for a recommendation. They'll spend $1 million on consultants before they cut their $5 million check, right? Going back to we want to level the playing field, we want anybody who's going to part with their hard-earned money to invest in impact in their community to have access to that type of resources. So to answer your question, yes, we curate best-in-class nonprofits on our platform. That's kind of like phase 1. We create portfolios of those nonprofits that are best in class, that are attacking specific issues. So right now we have a portfolio of nonprofits that are on the ground in Hurricane Ian, in Puerto Rico with Fiona, and in Ukraine. Because one of the things that I've observed is that a lot of people, they're inspired in moments to give. They'll watch the news of what's happening in Ukraine. They're like, man, I would love to do something to support that horrific war on the ground. And then they say, yeah, but I don't know the first thing about Ukraine. And then they go about their day. How tragic to waste that moment of inspiration. They'll pass an unhoused person on the street walking to work, and they'll be like, man, we have to solve this homeless problem. I don't know the first thing about homelessness, and it seems pretty complicated, so I'm going to keep walking. How do you remove the friction in that? So yes, that's a part of our longer term aim. Right now it's kind of a rudimentary in it, but over time with more data, absolutely, that's a huge component of what we're aiming to do. Thanks for the question.
How's it going? Thanks for coming. So philanthropy can be both giving of money, but also giving of time. And I'm curious, some companies will donate money to causes. Others will allow employees paid hours to donate their time to different causes that they care about. And so in the context of modern individual and corporate philanthropy, what are your thoughts of the effectiveness of time versus money?
This might surprise you, because I led a volunteer organization with 150,000 volunteers. If you are a company, I don't want your time, I want your money. There's 100 things that are more important to us than money, but they all cost money. And I think companies try to get really cute with corporate volunteerism. They say, we're gonna have a day of service. And they call a nonprofit and they're like, organize a day of service for us. And the nonprofit's saying, I got a dozen things to do. And so then they'll bring this nonprofit and they'll say, oh, come to this conference center at our offsite and arrange for us to pack backpacks. You know how inefficient that is for the nonprofit to set that up? It's a nightmare. Because you know what? They have a system for how they pack backpacks. It's at their warehouse. And they got all the stuff they need there. And the shipping dock for where they're going to ship the backpacks off is right there. Packing all that stuff up and bringing it to your vanity project, that's not worth it for them. But you know what they have to do? They have to do it. Because the company says, hey, but if you do it, we'll give you this $25,000 check. It's very ineffective philanthropy. Now, here to answer your question with a little less, I don't know, bullishness. Paid volunteer time off is really important. Giving your people, if your people want to volunteer, they're going to volunteer. They have an organization they want to volunteer at that's near and dear to their heart. It might be tutoring kids. It might be serving food in a kitchen because they grew up food insecure. It might be volunteering for a week in Florida with Team Rubicon. And we have a lot of volunteers in Team Rubicon that will take not just their VTO, but their PTO, their vacation days, to come for a week down to Florida and volunteer with us. It's the most inspiring thing I've ever seen. But you know what? They're our trained volunteers. And it's really a powerful opportunity, but like the vanity project volunteerism stuff, we have to get over that. And my apologies to anybody in here that's arranged them.
Hello, my name is Samira. I'm the founder of Women of the World organization here in Utah for over a decade to help displaced women from all over the world. You mentioned earlier you've been in Iraq. I don't know what part of Iraq. I am from Baghdad, Iraq. I'm kind of curious, what did you learn from your being in there? And did you go after the war, after 2003?
Well, first, thank you for your work with Women of the World. And thank you for your question. So I served in Iraq in 2007 as part of the surge. I served in an area outside of Fallujah called Zidon. I was not in Baghdad. My experience at war was absolutely formative. My tour in Iraq, I was in an infantry platoon. We were in an area called the Triangle of Death, and it was the bloodiest year of the war. It was an awful experience. And it taught me a lot about people, about the world, about foreign policy. We should not have invaded Iraq, and I apologize that we did, if that apology means anything to you. What I learned is that young men, in particular, will do desperate and completely irrational things when lacking economic opportunity. I saw that play out again in Afghanistan. I saw the horrors across both Iraq and Afghanistan of what happens when you take 50% of your population, the women in your country, and you marginalize them and don't give them the same opportunity that you give men. A lot of, I think, my life's journey was, inspired by, motivated by, having gone to war, and at the conclusion of my second tour, realizing I didn't want my life to be defined by war, and I never wanted to go back. I'll close by saying one of the most powerful moments I had with Team Rubicon was we worked really hard throughout 2016 at the height of the Syrian and Iraqi refugee crisis, as ISIS was displacing millions of people across those countries. And listen, we were complicit in the rise of ISIS as a country, and we need to acknowledge that, hold ourselves accountable for that. And we established a refugee camp in Thessaloniki, Greece. And I took my wife there in October 2016 just to see the operations on the ground and for her to kind of experience some of what Team Rubicon was doing. And I had meals or tea with several of the families that we were housing. It was an incredible operation. We actually took over this old textile factory and we built apartments out inside of it so that these people didn't have to live on a gravel lot in a tent, right? So it was like probably the most dignified refugee camp throughout Greece. And I was sitting down with this gentleman and his young son. His son was about 20 years old. They were from Mosul. And the son spoke some English. And so we were having this conversation with his father. And they didn't know that we were military veterans. And after about, 30 minutes of going back and forth, this old man, he hated me. I told him that I was a Marine Corps veteran, that I'd been in Iraq. And the young man, the 20-year-old, was just furious. And he looked at me and he said, I remember when the US soldiers came to my city in 2003, and they just destroyed everything. I think he was probably 8 years old. And he's like, and I've hated Americans ever since. And he goes, but what you guys are doing here, this is powerful. And he turned to his father and he translated this, and the father looked at me and he said, I was an Iraqi soldier too. And he had served in Saddam's army. He'd fought in the Iraq-Iranian war. And he reached across after all this anger, and he just put his hand on my knee and he's like, hey, I forgive you. You were just following orders. There was a period in my life when I was just following orders. And now you're doing the best you can to make a difference in the world. However, that was paraphrased through this translation. And I'm not sure it makes up for everything that happened over the last 20 years, but certainly made a difference in my life. And I know we made a difference in that family's life because they were able to escape and eventually found their way to Austria, where they're now building a new life of their own. So thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Are you able to stick around for a few minutes for those that didn't get it, or do you need to jet? Okay, thank you so much, Jake. Really appreciate your time. Round of applause for Jake. Thank you so much.